Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL team's best defenseman from worst to best. Now we ended up going through the center list a little while ago, but now it is time for the D-man for every single team. But when it comes to your favorite team and their best defenseman, where do they rank? Are they among the worst or are they among the best? Watch till the end for all the rankings and all the picks, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now let's start today's list really quickly here, and let's go on to the 32nd spot, the worst number one defenseman in the league. And I will say this player isn't really bad. I don't think they're horrible, but I do think they're a little bit overrated. At number 32 and the worst number one D-man, I have Ivan Provorov from the Philadelphia Flyers. Now again, I don't think he's a bad player, but I do think people kind of assume that on that Flyers defense, he's actually the lone good player on that defense, trying his best, which is true. I think he is trying his best, but also at the same time, I think he is part of the problem, especially on the defensive side of things. His offense and his production are still relatively fine, around that 30-point threshold every single year, but at the same time, I think his defensive game, the way he gets beat, especially in offensive rushes, I think is a little bit too much for my liking and not helping the Flyers whatsoever. But now let's move on to number 31, and the defenseman that also isn't bad by any means, and I think defensively has shown some great talent over the past 3 years, in Adam Larsson. Now, also to throw it out there, I'm using a 3-year sample size, so 2022 to 2020 are the years I'm looking at, and the only years I'm looking at to judge these players. And when it comes to Larsson, it's been a really inconsistent mess for me. In 2021, he was really good defensively, one of the better defensive defensemen in the league, and although I think he took a bump in his offense, I do think there were a lot of regression in his defensive game, and I feel like that kind of played a part in some defensive woes for Seattle, but I do think he's still a pretty solid defenseman, a guy that should be on a middle pairing though, in my opinion, rather than the top guy for a team. But next up at number 30, a player that was traded this last offseason, and one of the bigger trades that we saw in Mike Matheson of the Montreal Canadiens, who I guess is their number one guy now. I would consider him the number one guy. He's probably going to eat the most minutes next year. This last year in Pittsburgh, I thought had his greatest year fundamentally and overall. In 74 games, got 11 goals, 20 assists, 31 points, was really clicking on all cylinders. If that continues, he will be higher, but I also feel like 2021 and 2020 especially were rather rough years for his defensive and two-way game, but if he continues that in a bigger role with Montreal, that'll be a nice surprise. But next up at number 29, let's go on to a pretty interesting one from the Winnipeg Jets and their number one guy in Josh Morrissey. Now, I think most people consider Josh Morrissey to be younger than he is, 27 years old, which is crazy to think about. 13th overall in the 2013 draft. Had a much better year in my opinion, and definitely the best year out of the last three this last year, where in 79 games he got 37 goals, 37 points, 12 goals, and I thought looked much better on defense, which I thought was the most important thing. The confidence that he had on defense was way higher than what he had in 2020 and 2021 specifically, and I think if he continues that, he will be higher. But I also do think on that Jets roster with their weapons on offense, even 37 points in 79 games as the main guy is a little bit disappointing. But going on to another offensive defenseman here at number 28. Next up, I have from the San Jose Sharks, Erik Karlsson. I don't know why it's not in the graphic. Here we go. Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks, who is an interesting position these past 3 years, and with San Jose has definitely regressed due to some injuries and the inconsistencies there. But I still think the production has been good relatively, and even this last year in 50 games, got 35 goals. We know what Erik Karlsson is now, though, just a purely one-dimensional offensive guy that really puts so much pace to his game on offense, but on defense leaves a lot to be desired now. Now, speaking of leaving a little bit to be desired, let's go on to another offensive D-man, another Swedish offensive D-man that has regressed a little bit over these past few years in John Klingberg, the newest acquisition of the Anaheim Ducks and their number one guy. For me as a Stars fan, Klingberg has been a kind of tough watch over these past few years because there was a obvious hype back in like 2018, I would say, in terms of how much he was pushing. For me personally, I think he was a player that back then was creating a lot of his own offense, and even though the production is still pretty good to this day, I think he's more so coasting off of others' great success and a great pace. Although I do think he will be good for Anaheim this next year, the defensive game is always somehow an issue, and the inconsistencies get more and more as he gets older. But I do think in Anaheim, he will be a great power play offensive D-man. But next up, going on to number 26, one of the bigger players involved in trades last offseason. Next up, I got Seth Jones of the Chicago Blackhawks, who had a really good first year, all things considered, with how much of a mess Chicago was. he actually played pretty well. In 78 games, got 5 goals, 46 assists, 51 points, and easily had his best defensive year out of the 3 seasons. In 2021, I thought it was a really rough year for him on defense, and I had some major concerns with that contract and the trade that Chicago made, and even though I think, especially with now them going into the rebuild, it is still a mistake for them to have made that trade, Jones has proved to be pretty solid on that defense, and a decent number 1 guy for them. Coming in though at number 25, and another player that has changed teams pretty recently, and Alex Pietrangelo, who with Vegas, I think has had a weird tenure over these past 3 years. Now, including the past 3 years, his last year with St. Louis in 2020 is also included, where in 70 games he got 52 points. Though in his first year of Vegas, it was obvious that there were some big growing pains there. Ultimately, only got 23 points in 41 games, and I think definitely played like it. It was really not good for him, especially at the start. There were some major issues adapting to that system. In 2022, though, it was much better in 80 games, getting 44 points. But I also think the more seasons he plays, especially with Vegas, the worse that defensive game gets. Going on to another offensive D-man here, though, and I guess kind of Alex Pietrangelo's replacement in Justin Falk of the St. Louis Blues, who's had his own kind of inconsistencies, and especially with the Blues. I mean, in his first year, only 16 points in 69 games, looked horrendous, and just like Pietrangelo in his first year of Vegas, had a lot of adapting to go through, and we eventually saw more of that in 2021, where I thought he played a much more complete game, starting to get that defense back on track as well, and in 2022, his production started to get back to form, 16 goals as well, which was a pretty marvelous rate for him, and 47 points. While that defense isn't amazing, it has gotten better, and I feel like for Falk, as he continues to improve, as he continues to get more used to the Blues system, he's starting to be, I guess, a pretty decent replacement for Pietrangelo, all things considered. Next, I'm moving on to number 23, and another offensive defenseman, though, this time on the much younger side of things with Rasmus Dahlin. I know a lot of you guys might have him higher. For me personally, I've never been a big Dahlin fan, or at least not with his NHL time so far. I think there's been a lot of rawness on defense, and I've really yet to see that be addressed. But in Buffalo, he does get points, and he produces them in droves. You can't take that against them, and even though I think he's been a little bit sheltered in his offense and the situations he's put in, because I think he's put in the best possible situations to get points and rack them up, I still think there are some two-way instincts there that can be improved upon, and I really am hopeful that as Buffalo gets better, as that defense gets a lot better around him, then that will see Dahlin hopefully unlock that defensive game that I think we did see before he was drafted. But let's move on to one of the youngest players on this list, to one of the more tenured players on this list. Next up with the LA Kings number 1 in Drew Doughty, who at age 32 has had a weird last few seasons. I mean, you obviously see the production in 2018, 2017, 2016, back when I would say he was in his true prime, and there was a little bit of a dip there in terms of his overall game back in 2019, 2020, but I think in 2021 and 2022, he got much better on defense and started to prioritize that level of the game a little bit more, and I think it also just led to better overall results. I mean, he didn't play the full year and didn't even play half in 2022, but in 39 games, got 31 goals and played some of his best defensive hockey that he's played in a long time. I'm hoping to see that continue, because I think for the Kings to make that contract worth it, he kind of has to. But now moving on to the last player outside the top 20 and going on to another pretty young defenseman on this list. Next up, I have Noah Dobson of the New York Islanders. They're number 1. And last year, he turned a horrible season for the Islanders, for almost everybody, into a massive success. Now, he has one of the more shorter pedigrees, I would say, of this list, only playing really 1 full season, but I thought played really well in 2021. And in 2022, took massive steps, 51 points in 80 games. And you also combine, in my opinion, a really mature, solid, quiet, but also effective defensive game, and to me, he was an absolute bright spot for an Islanders team that didn't have much success whatsoever. But now, getting ourselves inside the top 20, going on to a player that was really hard to rank for me, at least, in Dougie Hamilton, the number 1 for the New Jersey Devils. He had a really rough year, let's be honest, 30 points in 62 games. Production was still okay, but considering what New Jersey was paying for, it was not up to snuff. But I think if he gets back to the 2021 and 2020 levels that he had with Carolina, it will be fine, and I think he will with New Jersey. But I think those 2 years with the Canes were extremely underrated. 40 points in 47 games and 42 points in 55 games was so rock solid in all offensive situations. And to me, even though he's never been amazing defensively, he also did take a little bit of a dip in that department too. So if he's able to get back to form on both defense and offense, I think he will be a lot higher next year. But next up, let's go on to number 19, and from the Columbus Blue Jackets, I have their their premier offensive defenseman in Zach Werenski, who also I think is a player that might be a little bit low for some. For me personally, I think a lot of it has to do with the health. I mean, you see the games that he's played over the past 3 seasons, 63 games in 2020, 35 games out of 56 available in 2021, and only 68 games in 2022. His most healthy seasons where he played 68 games. Not dependable enough, but when he has played, you've seen that shot be a high part of his game, and just the high-octane offense he provides is awesome. But that even strength and power play opportunities that he provides are so pivotal to that Blue Jackets offense. But again, just that consistency of his health is a big reason why I guess he could be so low. But next up, let's go on to the Edmonton Oilers and their quarterback in Darnell Nurse, who has had a lot of inconsistencies, I would say, over the past 3 years. I mean, in 2021, he got 36 points, 56 games, 16 goals, had a great offensive production, but I also thought the defense was getting a little bit ignored there, and I thought he was kind of letting some plays happen that shouldn't happen, especially along the slot. But I do think in 2022, he was able to use his physicality a lot more, and although the points per game wasn't nearly as good, I don't think it needed to be. He was way better on defense, and considering how much the Oilers are paying for him to play, I feel like having that two-way game, having a much better defensive consistency was a necessity, and he brought that in both the regular season and the playoffs too. But next up at number 17, let's go on to a player that some may consider a little bit too high, but I just love watching him, and I think at his best, he's one of the better defensemen in the NHL in Jacob Chychrun of the Arizona Coyotes. To me, if he was on an actual competent roster, he would be a top 10 guy or around that range for me. The talent there is unbelievable, and I think just being surrounded with that Arizona roster also doesn't really help too much. In 2020, 63 games played, 26 points. I thought the production was rather low compared to what he was able to put up in the defensive game he was also providing with Arizona, but in 2021, he started to have the production that I thought he could have, where in 56 games, he got 41 points, and in my opinion, he was a top 10, top premier defenseman in that 2021 season. He was unbelievable. Unfortunately, though, took a little bit of a step back due to injury, due to inconsistency in 2022, but to me, I think the offense took that kind of step back that you didn't want to see, but if he gets back to that 2021 level, to me, he's one of the best defensemen out there. Next up, though, going on to number 16, I have Morgan Rielly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I don't know, again, why did I not load that page? Here we go. We got Morgan Rielly of the Leafs, and a player that has had kind of some inconsistencies in his production. I mean, in 2020, 27 points in 47 games, definitely not the full year that he wanted to have, but in 2021, it got a little bit better, and in 2022, that production skyrocketed. 68 points in 82 games, and also in the playoffs was pretty good versus Tampa offensively, getting 6 points in 7 games played. The problem is, although the production of the offense, even strength, is great, he still is one of the most lackluster players on defense in the league, and especially the results that he puts up are just horrible every single year, unfortunately. But starting us out inside the top 15 with another offensive defenseman from an Ontario NHL team. This time, though, let's go on to the Ottawa Senators and their number 1 guy in Thomas Chabot. Now, I would say kind of like Zach Werenski a little bit. The health has been maybe not as big of an issue, but still kind of there. Only played 59 games this last year, but I thought he had the best overall season that he's ever had. If he played a full season, I think he could have been much higher on this list, because I think his defensive game took major strides and was so much more consistent, and he was a lot more physical and intense, especially along the boards, which I think helped his results. But one of the better offensive defensemen out there, and I think as the Sens get better too, and as that defense gets better too, I think that defensive game will also take big steps and could be much higher, maybe even inside the top 10 as soon as next year. But now going inside the top 14, and another Canadian offensive D-man, I got Quinn Hughes at this spot though, and the 2021 season, in my opinion, was kind of rough for him, especially on defense, but I think 2020, 2022 were both marvelous years overall, and in 2022, you see that production, 68 points in 76 games. Although Quinn Hughes has never been this amazing defensive guy, I feel like when he's playing at his best offensively, the defensive results also come. A lot of it is about confidence, and a lot of it is about maturity, and when he's playing at his most confident, he's a guy that, although is not the biggest, can still play pretty well along the boards and be able to get possession back, and you were able to see just how effective that was for Vancouver this last year. Next up, though, going on to number 13, another Canadian defenseman, in my opinion, that is extremely underrated. I got Noah Hanifin of the Calgary Flames. Now, you could make the case that Mackenzie Weegar is maybe the number 1 guy for the Flames now, but I will go for Hanifin since he's been one of the best minute eaters for the Flames and one of the best overall players for them over the past couple of years. And I think especially in 2022 was one of the main reasons why they were so good in the regular season. In 81 games, getting 10 goals, 30 assists, 48 points. And even though there were some production issues, I guess, if you can consider that, in 2020 and 2021, I think he's still been one of the most rock-solid two-way, defensive, collected guys over the past 3 years specifically, taking big strides in the defensive game and making that Flames defense so much harder to play against. And at age 25, he's turned into one of the better defensemen in the league, and especially in Canada. Now going on to another underrated defenseman next up, at number 12, I have from the Minnesota Wild, Jonas Brodin. Now another team that you could kind of debate who the first guy is. You could have Jared Spurgeon in this spot as well. I guess he would kind of be around this range for me too. But to me, Jonas Brodin is one of the most underrated defensemen out there. And to me, I could kind of see why. I mean, he's a defensive defenseman full through and through, but I think still puts up pretty big production. I mean, you see over the past 3 years, I mean, 28 points in 69 games. Last year, 30 points in 73 games. Those are not bad numbers for a pure defensive defenseman, but you also have the defensive side of the game, which in my opinion, he's one of the best defensive defensemen out there, and one of the most rock solid and consistent, and to me, he's a good offensive producer, as well as bringing some of the best quiet defense that you could ever hope to have. But now going on to the last player outside the top 10. Next up, I have a player that will definitely be much higher on this list, probably next year and over the next few seasons, in Moritz Seider of the Detroit Red Wings, the revelation on defense and the Calder winner as I predicted before the season started. Of course, 6th overall by the Red Wings at age 21, had a marvelous Calder campaign, and in 82 games got 50 points and was unbelievable and deserved to win that Calder trophy for sure. And the only reason I don't have him higher is just because of the 3-year sample size. He's only played 1 season, and that kind of goes against him a little bit in my opinion. If he had 3 seasons of that type of play in his rookie year, then he would absolutely be top 10. But let's be honest, after next year, he's going to be in that range and maybe hunting for a top 8 spot. But now let's move on to the top 10 defensemen left, and going on to the 10th spot, I'm going to go John Karlsson of the Washington Capitals. Now, usually, I'm not as high on Karlsson as others, and as high on him as I usually am right now, but I do think this 2022 season was really interesting from him. I mean, you see the 2020 season, he was well above a point per game, 75 points in 69 games as a D-man. In 2021, took a little bit of a step back on offense, and still was rather poor on defense, in my opinion. But 2022 was a different story from what I saw, at least. In 78 games, got 71 points, the typical John Karlsson type of amazing production, but I thought played maybe the best defensive hockey he's ever played. Sure, there was some big mistakes too. There's always them with John Karlsson, but I thought he was a lot more efficient in his own zone, and I think that's a reason why he is top 10 today. But now going on to another kind of older offensive D-man, let's go on to another Metro defenseman with the Pittsburgh Penguins in their number 1, Chris Letang. Still chugging along at age 35 and had a brilliant year in 2022, 68 points in 78 games, and although there has been some, I guess, production issues, maybe 2020 is an example, 44 points in 61 games, and although the defensive side of the game is never going to be amazing when it comes to Letang, he's still proved to be one of the most consistent leaders, one of the most consistent offensive and puck-moving defensemen, and with how valuable he's been for the Pens, I think he deserves to be in this spot and be around this range. But now we can move on inside the top 8, and in my opinion, the next 8 defensemen are far and away the best defensemen in the league. I mean, I love Chris Letang, love me some John Karlsson, but the top 8 really distances itself from the rest of the list. And now we start off that side of the list at number 8 with Aaron Ekblad of the Florida Panthers. Now, it's crazy to think he's just 26 and already this good, but obviously as a first overall pick, he's really progressed every single year and gotten better and better every single year. Now, you could say the health is a little bit of a question. I think that is a reason why he might not be just a tad bit higher, only playing 67 games in 2020, only playing 35 games in 2021, and only playing 61 games in 2022. But when he has played, he's been one of the best two-way defensemen, and that offense has gotten better and better. This last year, 57 points in 61 games, and was absolutely brilliant. But next up, let's move on to another underrated D-man, and one of the younger players on the list in Miro Heiskanen, my boy for the Dallas Stars. Now with John Klingberg gone, he's officially the number 1 guy, and I feel like for some people, they'll underrate him because of the production, but I think he's a great example of why you shouldn't judge players just based on points, because I feel like if Heiskanen was in a more offensive situation, if he was in Colorado, he'd be getting 65, 70 points easily. He's the type of player that is needing to be in the better situation offensively, but let's be honest, is one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, one of the best skating defensemen in the NHL, and I feel like hopefully with Peter DeBoer coming into the fold, Miro Heiskanen will be able to put up the points that he does really create. I mean, he creates a lot of offense and creates it in droves, especially even strength, and I think deserves to get a lot more production to back up those results. But let's go on to the 6th best number 1 D-man in the entire NHL with the Carolina Hurricanes number 1 in Jacob Slavin. Now, Slavin has been interesting. I mean, in 2021, the production wasn't nearly as great. 15 points in 52 games. I got a little bit unlucky during that campaign, and although there was a dip in the offense, especially on even strength, I didn't think he deserved to have that low point production, but we saw that production really take a bigger next step in 2022, 42 points in 79 games, but to me, it's never about the production with Slavin. Just like Heiskanen, one of the best defensemen defensively out there, one of the best positional players out there, and you combine the IQ, you combine the anticipation in his game defensively, and he's one of the best all-around defensemen you can find out there right now. But now, going inside the top 5 best defenseman list, let's go on next up to Charlie McAvoy, one of my favorites to watch, and another player that until this last year really didn't have the amazing production that most people would expect. I mean, you see in 2020, 32 points in 67 games, but this last year, 56 points in 78 games, and in my opinion, McAvoy is one of the most compact and efficient defensive defensemen out there. Nothing too flashy, but he always gets the job done, and you never have to worry when he's on the ice, which at age 24 is unbelievable to think about. And I have always loved his even strength offense, even if the production hasn't been amazing, but if he's able to keep that around 60 point pace and provide world-class defense, he deserves to be in the top 5 slots. But next up, moving on to number 4, this might be a little bit of a controversial take because I know some people definitely would have him higher, but at the 4th spot, I'm going to go Roman Josi of the Nashville Predators. Now, here's the thing. Obviously, with him, I'm pretty sure being on pace for 100 points this last year. The offense, no doubt, is maybe the best in the league right now, and especially on the power play, is unbelievable. But I do think what holds him back a little bit for me is how that defense has kind of slipped. The more Yossi's production has gotten better, the more I think he sacrifices that defense for offense. And I think this last year was a great example of that in 2022. 96 points in 80 games, unreal production, but I felt also that his defensive game was at an all-time low. Still though, proving to be one of the best defensemen and offensive defensemen in the league. But next up, going on to number 3 and the top 3 best out there, let's go on to my boy in Victor Hedman, who has done so much great for the Lightning, and again, over these past 3 years, has three Stanley Cup final appearances and 2 Stanley Cup wins, and a lot of that Tampa success has been because of him. But you look over the past 3 seasons, to me, he has been the best defensive defenseman in the entire league, especially last year in 2022. I thought he was the best out there on defense, while being above a point per game, 85 points in 82 games. Obviously, everybody will look at Roman Jossi's production, but the year that Hedman had, I don't think should be ignored. He was unbelievable. And just proving how good defensemen are right now, let's go on to the 2nd spot and the New York Rangers number 1 D-man in Adam Fox, who at age 24 is already becoming one of the best and in the conversation for the best defenseman in the entire NHL. And you just see the production of the past 3 years, 42 points in 70 games, then 47 points in 55 games, and then 74 points in 78 games, and then 23 points in 20 playoff games for the Rangers, really taking those next steps. And even though I think this last year's defensive game took a little bit of a hit, he's still one of the best all-around defensemen out there, one of the most mature, one of the most smart, one of the most compact, and one of the best defensemen, period. But now, moving on to the number 1 spot, especially after the playoffs that he had, there's no doubt in my mind, at least in many people's minds, that Cale Makar is the best defenseman in the NHL. At age 23, right in the prime, in the thick of his career right now, and entering it, you can see just how good he has been over the past 3 years. And we now have 3 full seasons with Cale Makar, which is fun to think about. But you see his rookie campaign, 50 points in 57 games, then a point per game in 2021, and then 86 points in 77 games in the regular season in 2022, and then 29 points in 20 playoff games. The best offensive defenseman in the world, and I think especially this last year in 2022, his defense took a massive step up. It was never bad, it was always just okay, but this last year, it was truly great, and I think that's truly what sets Cale Makar apart, especially that number 1 spot, providing the best offense, while also providing some of the best defense as well. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what are your thoughts on my rankings? What do you agree, what do you disagree with my number 1 defensive picks? And let me know also, for your team's number 1 D-man, where should they be on the list? Should they be higher? Should they be lower? Let me know your thoughts down below. Share this video with your friends, get it to all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. If you want some behind the scenes, I recorded this video and I didn't have my mic turned on, so this is my second opportunity doing it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.